So my name is Randall, and I believe that every game developer deserves to be successful, and that's really important. I'm from Austin. I'm the current technical project manager for a company called IQ Insights. Before that, I was a project manager for a game company for 2 years. I've been the Austin IGDA chapter vice president since January 2015, and in March of this year, I launched my own business, Gray Vulture. So about Austin, Austin is pretty much one of the indie game capitals of the world. We have a huge community, and we've got unbelievable talent that's making some of the biggest games out there. I mean, if you've heard of Crowfall, that's there. If you've heard of the new VR game, what is it? Oh, what's up? Yeah, The Wave. That's a huge one. There's all sorts of stuff. Job Simulator. That's another big one. That's all in Austin. So there's a lot of huge talent that's happening in Austin. But one of the challenges, though, is there's a lot of great talent, but it's how do we get that game and turn it into an actual product? And that's a challenge in and of itself. And what's interesting is it's not something that's an Austin issue. This is a global issue. This is something that affects people all over the place. And that's something that I want to kind of bring to the table, bring some new ways of thinking. So kind of the mindset I want to throw out there is, I mean, if the goal is to release a game and make any kind of money, you need to kind of think about essentially running a startup, right? And the game's kind of like the product. But the deal is, though, I mean, if you're going to run your own business, right, you're going to run it like a business. There's game development tools, and then there's business tools, and they're completely different, right? It's a different way of thinking, which is pretty much saying, like, your game is none of your business, right? Two total separate things, and you need to have both to be successful. So what I'm going to hit is writing a business plan. We'll talk about strategy. We'll talk about running experiments, hit some next steps, and do some Q&A at the end. But to start off, yeah, as I said, look, I'm going to be blowing through a bunch of slides on this. This is a pretty big talk. For anything in particular, get with me later. Feel free to ask me questions. I highly encourage you to go online and look at this stuff yourself as well. To start off with the story, I mean, this is something that we all kind of know. We see this pretty typically. We have game developers that pour their heart and soul into making a game, and they finish it, they do a social blast, release it, and, or not very much. So how do we avoid that? What if you knew that your game filled a need for players? What if you knew that you could get feedback from early adopters and stuff that would really help, get you through the stuff? And then grew a social presence, and you knew exactly how many, units to ship in order to cover all your costs, right? So let's talk about business plans. Now, does anybody know anything about canvases? Has anybody seen this? You got 1, 2. So this is pretty simple, all right? It's a one-sheeter to write down all these pieces of information about your business, basically it. And it started with Alex Osterwalder, and I would really recommend anyone check out Amy Jo Kim. Her stuff with the Getting to Alpha program is phenomenal. She goes over the MVP Canvas, but we'll be focusing more on Ash Maurya and his book, Running Lean and Scaling Lean. I'm also going to be using a case study from Motocolor Runners, and that was developed by Brendan Vitano. I highly encourage you to check out his stuff. He's actually here at Casual Connect. Check out his game, check out his stuff, and say hello. The canvas kind of starts off with the customer. The sheet's pretty simple. You write down your assumptions for each section. So for the customer section, you just write down who is your target people, who are you trying to really get, right? And also, who are your early adopters? For the problem section, like, what problem are you trying to solve for, your game, right? Like, what kind of market, like, is there no good platformer on iOS? Is there, a particular thing that you're trying to hit? And what games are people buying right now that your game is kind of similar to? What's that competition, right? For the unique value proposition, this is very key. This is what you should know in your core. How are you different, right? And why is your game worth buying than anyone else's game? And how do people benefit from playing your game? And the solution is pretty simple. This is literally your game. And on a high level, what does your game do? What do players do in your game? And I would recommend this book, Game Design by Bob Bates. And in there's a lot of great information about like writing documentation, including this pitch doc, which is a one-sheeter in and of itself of high concept, genre, gameplay, that kind of stuff. It's a good book to get. Now, channels is hugely, hugely important. This is your inbound and outbound channels, right? So how are people finding you, and how are you finding other people? This is Twitch, Facebook, your own personal website. And it's really important to know, all right, which one of these channels is the most valuable, right? Which one of these is giving you the most traction, right? So, and what's really, really huge about this is if you don't nail this, then people don't know about you. People don't know about your game. So this is something you really want to test. Which one of these channels is the best channel for you, right? How are you getting more people to see what you're doing? Cost structure is pretty simple. This is all money going out, right? So this has everything to do with your hosting fees, your development costs, your licenses, rent, utilities, like how much money does it cost to kind of get this thing done? And on the opposite side, it's money coming in, it's revenue, right? So this would be, how do you plan on making money with your game at all, right? Is this direct purchases? Are you doing add-ons? Are you doing monetization, right? And then for key metrics, this is stuff that really is important about your game, what you're trying to do, right? So you might want to, in your game, you might want to have like, all right, how many people am I reaching per month? What's my average play time per user? But is anyone familiar with pirate metrics? All right, so this is pretty simple. Actually, and this is pretty good. So pirate metrics, you have acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. And the reason why it's called pirate metrics is if you take the first letter, it spells R. This is really good to research, but think about it this way. All right, so acquisition is like, all right, are we getting people's attention, right? First off. Activation, that's more like how many people are we actually getting to play our game? Retention, how long are we keeping them engaged, right? How long are people staying in there? Referral, how many people are telling other people about your game? And revenue, ultimately, like how many sales are we making? And the last part, this is a little interesting to think about. So unfair advantage, this has everything to do with what makes you really kind of unique, right? What do you have that no one else has? And think about this. This is kind of an important question. You're putting your heart and soul into this game. If someone clones your game, what advantage do you still have? Do you have like a large community of people that you engage with? Maybe you have a lot of followers. Maybe you have mentors that work with you. If the game got copied, how are you still advantageous? Using Rotocolor Runners as an example, some of the standouts that were here were, say for instance, like in the customer segment, it was people who like to create and share content. Previous games would have been Res, right? That's a good example. So it's easy to think, all right, well, who bought Res? What did Res do well? Why did people buy that game, right? And at the same time, as far as like a unique thing for this game, there weren't any other electronic games out there, electronic music games, where you could create the music and share it. So it led to a lot of conversation about things that we'd be able to test by doing this. And of course, this is going to get hashed out. We're going to determine, which of this stuff is actually true. Because this sheet will change. But that's the whole point, is to write down your initial thoughts of this stuff and test it over time and validate that you are correct. So we'll do another story. So what about isolation, right? If we do games in isolation, right? We have a talented game developer and just does it completely in isolation, maybe shows friends and family, you're not going to get action-oriented feedback out of it. You're not going to get stuff that really matters to putting out a game. And then at the end of the day, kind of the same thing, put it out there, maybe not get the kind of results that you're looking for. So what if you're able to validate the idea before you actually went into development? Here's the game idea. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to validate that this is even worth making before I even get started developing this thing. That's a huge, huge deal because you don't want to waste your time, right? How are we going to get feedback? How can we prove traction, right? And can we get any pre-sales? So let's talk about strategy. So for this, we're going to be using the strategy sheet. Again, this is something from Ashmoria. And strategy in and of itself has, think about your development in 3 phases. There's the idea phase, there's the actual game development phase, and then it's the phase to bring it to market. A lot of people will probably do the first 2. Yeah, I have an idea and I made it, but there's not so much of an idea of how do we bring this to the market? How do I sell this? That's in a completely different phase in and of itself, right? So do I have a game worth creating? Do I have a game that resonates with a significant market? And do I have a product that is sellable, right? And can meet a financial goal? So the first step, think about your overall goal. What is this project that you're going to do? Like, what's the minimum success criteria for your product, right? And to use an example, let's say we kind of wrote down our costs, and we knew that we had to make $100,000 in a year. That was the goal, all right? Well, if you sell your game for $10, then you already know, all right, I got to get 10,000 sales. If I get 10,000 sales for $10 each, I hit that $100,000 goal, right? And just thinking about that lets you think about, like, all right, so how do I do that? How do I get to 10,000 sales, right? But even on top of that, there's, if I have 10,000 sales, right? What if only like 1 in 10 buys, right? So what I need to do is I need to get, 10 times as many people to actually maybe play this game. And even then, I need to reach out to maybe another 10 times the amount of people to actually see this thing. How do I market to 1 million people? How do I get this game out to 1 million people, right? And then, out of 1 million people, if 10% of them, actually want to check out and play the game, or like maybe do a trial, then that's 100,000, and then maybe out of that 10%, they'll actually buy it, so you get your 10,000 sales. But that's something you've really got to think about. And the third step is, what is your strategy and your minimum success criteria for each phase, right? So we'll hit it from the very beginning here. So on background, this is really just, what is the reason for doing this particular strategy? Are we trying to validate that we have a good idea? Are we trying to validate that we have a good demo? Like, what's the ultimate goal of this strategy that you're probably going to be running for 4, 5, 6 months, right? What led you here? Current condition, this is everything to do with, what's happening right now with the game. I mean, right now, do I have 200 followers on Facebook? Do I have a game that's in demo mode? It's not really ready. Where are we currently at? What's the current situation, right? And then analysis, this is actually a very strong kind of look in the mirror thing. Like, write this down, because the more that you're realistic with yourself, the more you're going to have a good idea, like, kind of what to do. Just be honest with yourself. This is the truth, right? Why are things happening the way that they are, right? And then from this, the goal is, all right, so what is the goal of this phase? Are we trying to get more users? Are we trying to have a solid demo that we'd be able to show? Like, what's the strategy? What's the goal of this strategy, right? And then from there, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to do it? How are we going to build what we're going to build? How are we going to measure the output of what we build? And who are we trying to reach? And then, if this plan works, what logically comes next? If this strategy works and we're able to hit our goals, then what logically comes next? Are we going to try to expand the market? Are we going to try to get more referrals? Are we going to try to add revenue streams after this? So think about what's the overall strategy, and then from here, pretty much what comes next. So going back to Rotocolor Runners, some of the standouts that came out of this was the game already existed. When Brendan and I started talking, the game already existed, right? So then it became a goal of like, all right, well, we need to validate the idea and validate like, all right, is there a market for this game? Because that's very important. Before, we spend way too much more time like really, further developing the game, is there a market for it, right? So how do we do that? What's the strategy to determine that there is a market for it, right? Did a lot of root cause analysis, and it led to a lot of discussion on how to best take advantage of conferences, right? And that actually led to a completely other thing about what does the timeline look like? Like, if we're able to validate these things by this time, what logically makes sense kind of going down the road? What's the roadmap, right? And it turned into a conversation that was pretty good about, each festival that's coming up, and then how to be successful for each one of those. Maybe, like, would there be a time to do a Kickstarter? If so, when would that happen? And then, what would be a potential release date? So, last little idea here, navigating without a map. We'll do this kind of last one. Now, this has everything to do with the product. As a developer, you're creating this game, but again, it's a product. But what if you don't test the game as a product? What if you're not testing how many people am I acquiring? What if we're not testing, retention rates? What if we're not testing purchasing? Which, by the way, that's one of the biggest validators ever. There's so much intent. You talk to people, and they'll say, like, oh, yeah, of course, I will buy this game. I intend to buy this game. Buy it now. Ask that question. I mean, the worst thing they're going to say is no, right? But that's a big, big deal. If people put their money down, that's a huge, huge validator that you have a good game, right? But if you don't do that, you kind of run into this problem. A lot of promises, not enough action. How do we get to action, right? So what if we knew the right target audience and early adopters? What if we knew, the best channels for getting the game exposed, right? How do we know that we have the right price for this game? How can we test against that? How can we test pricing? So with that, I'll hit experiments. And again, we'll look at this as an experiment sheet. Now there's two sides to this sheet. There's the beginning side and kind of the results side, like the planning side and then the results side. And we'll hit that in a second. But on this, it's a tool. This is a way to validate your business plan. This is a tool to validate your strategy, right? So are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the wrong thing? All right. And the thing is you can run multiple experiments at a time, right? This isn't like a one-to-one thing. These are usually just 1 to 2 weeks, and we validate, do we have the right people? Do we have the right price? Do we have the right channels? So again, we'll start off with just the background. This is, what are we testing and why? Are we testing if Twitch is good for us? And if so, why? Now, the falsifiable hypothesis, this has everything to do with basically, all right, what specific action you're going to do, and then what do you expect the result to be? And if this is like a 2-week thing or a 1-week thing, what's the amount of time? And again, usually it's like 1 to 2 weeks. So a good example of this would be, all right, by streaming our plays on Twitch, we expect that we'll get 100 new people coming to our website in 2 weeks. And you run that test. If it turns out we only got 50, then you learn something. If you get 150, you learn something. And that's the whole point of this whole thing, right? It's to learn what's working, what's not working, and why. And then this is really just how we're going to do it. What are we going to build? How are we going to do this experiment? Do we need anything for this experiment? How are we going to capture the information afterwards, right? How are we going to do this? So that's section 1. That's when you start. After the experiment is done, what were the results? What actually happened? What are the real numbers, right? If we knew that we had, our hypothesis was we got 100 people, or we're going to test this, and we expected 100 people to come to the website, then what actually happened? Did we get more? Did we get less? And from here, what happened? What are we learning out of this? What was the kind of look in the mirror moment? Why did you get these results, right? Was it because something came up? Was it because there was a technology issue? You didn't think something else was going to happen? You thought you'd have more people? Why did this happen, right? So there's a lot of reasons why you can take this information and then just determine, all right, based on what just happened, what's the logical next step, right? Based on what we learned, what's the next experiment that we can run, right? what should we do next? What makes the most sense to do? So going back to Rotocolor Runners, one of the things here was going to be testing the pricing, right? Like, did it make sense to sell at this price point? That's something we really got to know, right? And from here, what are the specific quantifiable goals? You know, that we get more subscribers, followers, customers, right? You'll notice it's not done because Casual Connect, I think, is still happening, right? So afterwards, we're going to meet and we're going to go over that. We're going to go over what was the result of all this. What did we learn, right? And how can that be applied to everything else? Not only like just conferences in the future, but like based on what happened this week and capturing this information, what are we going to do next week? What things can we do based on this learning experience? So next steps. Again, what if you had a business plan? What if you started testing each part of this, like testing your channels, you know, capturing metrics, making sure you have the right audience? Test all these pieces. Test your strategy. Validate that you have a strategy that's actually working, right, before you get too far into it. And then run these experiments to learn this information. So I encourage you, take action. You know, create that first initial canvas, create an initial strategy. Start getting this stuff down. Start running experiments. Because, right now, you can think about what can I do right now to get more engagement? What can I do right now to know that I've got the right people playing the game and giving me feedback, right? Because at the end of the day, it's supposed to go out there. You want to release this thing, and you want it to be successful. How do you do it? These are all tools. So with these tools, my hope is that every game developer will be successful. Thank you.
One of the things you talked about was kind of building up this company after the game, and I'm interested in what your opinion or insight is into when I need to move from what might be personal branding to specific game branding. When do I, for example, make a Twitter account for my game? Or when do I, make the move to make it a company versus just a game I make on the sides?
Well, I think the first thing is thinking about, you want to build traction around it, right? So let's say, for instance, if you have a game right now and you're showing it off to people, how can you best show it off? Because you want to know, all right, does this game, have value to people, and is it providing enough, impact to people where I have to buy it? And if you can validate that, then the more that you're able to grow that audience, let's say, for instance, if you started with 100 people today, and in 4 months it was 1,000, and then another 4 months it was 100,000, right? I think it's a pretty good indicator that you have a business at this point, right? And then you can start kind of jumping into, all right, so let's make that LLC. Let's go ahead and do these things. And by the way, who do you know that's already doing that? Learn from them. If you have other friends that have started LLCs, if you have other friends that, or mentors that have kind of done this, what are the best lessons out of that, right? Because you don't want to repeat the same mistakes, right? But it's a good way just to say, all right, if this is working, then yeah, how do I do it? And then how do I separate that time for game development and that business side? Because if I don't spend enough time on that business side, I want this thing to be released. I want this thing to be successful. How do I do it? And it's just kind of like biting the bullet. You just got to do that business part of it. And if you're not going to do it, get someone else to do it. That's the other thing. If you would prefer, listen, you take care of it, I'm doing this, fine, so long as you guys are aligned. But if nobody's doing it, you're just going to run into that same trap.
So what would you say is the hardest part overall of this process? It's almost like a scientific method for turning.
It is a scientific method. Really, the hardest part out of this whole thing is just being honest with yourself. Simply put. I mean, because, we did this one-sheet business plan, and it's just really just, being honest, who are these people? What are the channels? And it's just getting to think about it. What is the way to do this? What is the way to do this? And a lot of people, they'll run these tests. They'll run these all right, sure, I ran these experiments and maybe I came up with some fake numbers to kind of pump myself up. No, this is, it is science. This happened. This is what I thought was going to happen. This is what actually happened. I'm learning from it. And if you don't have that ability to look at yourself and know that this, was successful or this wasn't successful, if you don't have that, thick skin to be able to take that information and run with it, and do something about it. I think people kind of get stuck in the, no, it's a good idea, no, it's a good idea, no, it's a good idea. But it's not. If you have so many people that are telling you, no, that doesn't work, or I don't like this gameplay, or, it's okay. We don't want to put stuff out that's, it's okay. That's not why we're here. We want to put out stuff that's the best ever. And you got to take that feedback. If you don't take that feedback, that's the hardest part, is knowing I'm going to run this. This is, I'm putting it out there, and I'm going to get that feedback. Here's how I capture it, and what can I do with it? How can I take this information, good or bad, and run with it? That's probably the hardest bit.
So following on from that, great Disney movie, Ratatouille, Chef Gusteau said, everyone could cook, but at the end of the day, sort of not everybody should cook. I mean, you end up sort of doing all this stuff, and so, well, hey, I've got this game. When do you sort of decide, maybe we should take it around the back of the shed and shoot it, because you've tried all these things, and not every game is going to be great.
Right. And
when's that point? And you have an experience of actually dealing with somebody who's poured their heart and soul into this thing. So it's just not fun.
If you run into that problem, right? I'm not saying you specifically.
No.
No, I think it's just more like, that's another good example of like, all right, I have an idea, I'm going to run with it, and if it's not good, then I'd rather know that sooner rather than later. I would much rather know that it's a not good idea so they can get to the next one. I mean, think about that. Let's say, all right, you got two examples, all right? So example one is create a game, and you just totally do it in isolation. You spend let's say 5 months on this thing, and you're like, man, it's the best ever. You never get feedback anywhere, right? In situation B, it's like you start working on it maybe a couple of weeks, and then you find out dude, nobody likes this thing. The mechanics don't work or whatever. But even then, what if you made that change? What if there's little change that you could make, and then it did become good, right? If it didn't become good at all, then you don't do that rest of the work. You don't waste the rest of that time, right? Imagine person A, 5 months in, starts testing and realizes that nobody likes it, versus someone who spent 2 weeks. That person that's in 2 weeks realizing that it's not good, can move on to the next thing way before person A, right?
Big round of applause for Randall. Thank you very much.